It was a bright, clear Saturday. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the new house we'd just bought, casting golden light across the hardwood floor. Everything looked perfect. I stood alone in the living room. The house sat on the edge of a quiet neighborhood with a tall white oak in the front yard. My choice. I knew Jacob liked reading under a tree with a cup of coffee. This house was a gift Richard and I had planned for our son after his wedding. Surprise. He didn't even know it existed. We were going to bring him here on his 30th birthday, hand him the keys and watch his face light up. But I never expected that this house would be where I uncovered the secret of my marriage. That day I had only come by to check on the furniture installation. The house was finished but move-in wasn't for another week. I've always been hands-on. I wanted to make sure every last detail was in place. I was holding the vacuum cleaner, walking from the doorway of the master bedroom toward the bed. I intended to vacuum under it. It was a motion I'd done 100 times, thoughtless, automatic. But as I pushed the vacuum forward, it abruptly stopped. I frowned, turned it off and crouched down to see what was stuck. Right in the center under the bed, something purple had caught between the floorboards. I hesitated. My first thought was some electrician had left behind a bit of wire insulation. But when I pulled it out, my breath caught. It was a used tampon. I stood there frozen, my mind blank. My first instinct was to blame some careless worker. But then I remembered, I'd personally checked everything after the house was finished. I had laid the mattress protector with my own hands. And only 2 people had the key to this house. Me and Richard. My fingers trembled as I peeled back the bed linens. The mattress surface looked clean. But right at the center, near where a pillow might rest, was a faint dried brown stain, barely visible except in the slanting sunlight. I knew what it meant. I may be older, but I stay informed about women's health. And I haven't had a period in years. Richard knew that. So there was only one conclusion. A younger woman had been here. A woman I had never heard about. I took photos and sent them to the property management company, asking if any employees might have accessed the house without permission. 10 minutes later, the phone rang. The voice on the other end was cautious, nervous. "Mrs. Benton, we've checked the security logs. No unauthorized access. Over the past 30 days there've been exactly 2 entries. Yours and Mr. Richard Benton's." Silence. "Would you like us to investigate further?" "No," I hung up. My voice was steady, eerily calm. My fingers clenched the purple tampon like it was a fuse wire. And I was standing in a house made entirely of explosives. I stared at the smart speaker still waiting to be mounted by the bed. Then I heard the jingle of keys at the front door. "Claire? You upstairs?" Richard's voice echoed through the empty house. I shoved the tampon into my pocket and straightened the bed sheets. Took a deep breath. Walked out of the room. He was standing in the kitchen doorway with a bag of fresh shrimp in one hand and a bottle of white wine in the other. When he saw me, he smiled, gentle, familiar. "I figured you'd be here cleaning. Thought I'd bring something you love. You'll never guess what I'm making. Salt and pepper shrimp. Your favorite." He turned and began prepping in the kitchen, deftly cleaning the seafood like he'd done it 1,000 times. I just stood there watching his relaxed, effortless movements. And I realized I didn't recognize this man. This was the man I had once been willing to give up everything for. When we were younger, he came from nothing. I turned down a promotion so he could advance his career. I took care of our home, raised our son, kept everything running so he could focus on his research. We had weathered 30 years together. He was the center of my world. And now I stood in the home we bought for our son, holding something intimate, something used by another woman. The oil in the pan started to crackle. He looked back at me. "Claire, you okay? You're awfully quiet." I pressed my lips together and forced a smile. "Nothing. Just a bit of a headache. I think I'll lie down." He nodded. "Go rest upstairs. I'll call you when dinner's ready." I walked back into the bedroom, closed the door, leaned against the wall, and finally admitted the truth to myself. I had never truly known the man I married. But that was about to change. From this day forward, I was going to see him clearly. Very, very clearly. The next day was Jacob's birthday. 30, a milestone for him. For me, it felt like the end of a long chapter in motherhood. I had planned to gift him this house, to tell him it was the fruit of decades of hard work by his father and me. But now I wasn't so sure. I hadn't slept all night. That tampon and the dried stain on the mattress kept playing on a loop in my mind. At one point, Richard rolled over in his sleep and I just stared at him, long enough to feel like he was no longer the man I thought I knew. He was up even earlier than I was, wearing a light gray suit he rarely chose, paired with a pale blue tie. "What do you think?" he asked, adjusting the knot in the mirror, his tone almost boyish, like he was heading to a high school dance. "You look sharp," I said flatly. "But it's not your birthday. Why so formal?" He chuckled. "Jacob's turning 30. He might bring some friends. We should look presentable." Then he glanced back at me. "Just because you don't want to dress up doesn't mean I want us both looking sloppy." His eyes sparkled with the familiar charm I'd fallen for, but I noticed something else too. The bags under his eyes were darker than usual. Sleepless night? Or maybe guilt? I said nothing. Just went back to plating breakfast. But I was already noting every detail. Every bit of excitement in his voice. Wondering, was it all for Jacob? Or for someone else? Jacob arrived around noon carrying a cardboard box and beaming. He wasn't typically the exuberant type, but today he looked radiant. "Happy birthday, Mom," he joked. I laughed. "Pretty sure it's your birthday, sweetheart. Since when did the guest of honor start handing out greetings?" Behind him stood a young woman. Brown hair, big eyes, tastefully dressed, holding a small cake box. "This is Emily," Jacob introduced. "We met in grad school." "Hi, Mrs. Benton." Emily smiled warmly, politely. "I've heard a lot about you from Jacob. I've also taken your husband's class." I froze for half a second. "Your husband? Not Jacob's dad. What program are you in?" I asked. "Sociology MA," she said brightly. "I just joined Dr. Benton's research group." Richard cut in quickly, like he'd been waiting to steer the conversation. "Claire, you might not remember. Emily came by once a few years ago. Back then she wasn't my student, but she recently transferred to my group as a research assistant." I nodded slowly. "Oh, that explains why she looked familiar." Emily moved into the living room with ease, no hesitation, as if she already knew the layout of the house. Halfway through lunch she suddenly clutched her stomach and went pale. "Sorry, I think my period just started," she whispered to Jacob. "Could I use the bathroom?" I opened my mouth to point her toward the guest bath, but before I could say anything she was already heading toward the master bedroom. I froze. How did she know that door led to the master suite? This was her first time here. Today. Richard didn't stop her. He just glanced at her walking away, then calmly went back to serving himself. Something was wrong. Deeply, unmistakably wrong. A moment later, Jacob pulled a small bag from under the table and handed it to me. "Mom, can you bring this to her? Emily said she needs it and, well, I don't think I should be the one." I took the bag without a word. I didn't even have to look. The packaging was that same familiar purple. Identical to the tampon I'd found under the bed yesterday. I stood outside the bedroom door, ears ringing. My chest tightened, but I steadied my breath and kept my voice calm. "Emily, you need this tampon, right? Is this the brand you usually use?" "Oh yes, thank you, Mrs. Benton," she answered easily from behind the door. "I always use this one. It's comfortable and I don't have allergies." "You girls know what works best for you," I replied with a smile, hooking the bag onto the doorknob. I walked back to the dining room in silence, my heart cold as stone. After the meal, I said I was tired and would head back to our place in the city. Richard offered to stay behind and clean the kitchen. I nodded and left. Or at least I pretended to. I sat in the car outside, engine off, watching the house. The lights stayed on. 5 minutes later, Emily walked out. Her steps were light, as if she'd just completed a mission. She didn't wait for Jacob to escort her. She turned the corner and slid into a sedan already parked there. In the driver's seat, Richard. He turned toward her. They exchanged a few words, then drove off together. I didn't follow them. I didn't need to. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Some evidence doesn't need to be confirmed. But I wanted more. More than enough to burn his lies to the ground. I called a security company and scheduled a full surveillance system install for the next day. Starting tomorrow, the house we built as a gift for Jacob would become the trap I set for Richard. Early the next morning, I returned to the house in the city and did the coldest, most resolute thing I've ever done. I installed 3 hidden cameras in the new home. I contacted a smart security company and picked out a high-resolution model with discrete lenses. One was hidden in the bookshelf of the study, another inside the lamp fixture by the master bed, and the third near the living room speaker. There wasn't a single blind spot. When the technician asked, I simply said, "I bought this house for my son. I'm just worried he might start hanging out with the wrong kind of friends." He nodded, asked no more. After he left, I stood alone in the empty kitchen, staring at the unopened bottle of champagne on the counter, the one we'd meant to pop for Jacob's birthday. I pulled out my phone and opened the new app. Tested the remote connection. The feed from the master bedroom was crystal clear. The study sharp and wide. "Perfect," I murmured. Richard didn't suspect a thing. That night when he got home, he even brought my favorite, Italian-style roasted chicken wings. Said the recipe came from a colleague's wife. I took a bite. It was good. As he topped off my wine glass, he glanced at me with concern. "You've seemed a little off lately. Everything okay? You look tired." I forced a small smile. "Getting old. Sleep's been a mess. Want me to take you to see a doctor?" "No need to tough it out." He gently patted the back of my hand, eyes soft. It almost looked like concern. Or was it a test? I nearly laughed. He was playing the part so well. Even his hand felt just like it always had. But I knew, his heart hadn't been here for a long, long time. Then came the opportunity. Friday evening, Richard announced he'd be locking himself in the study to prep next week's lectures. He even made it sound official. "I'd rather not be disturbed," he said. "Of course," I replied, handing him a cup of tea. "I'll be in bed early anyway. Take your time." The moment he closed the door, I walked straight to our bedroom drawer and pulled out his old tablet. The one he'd stopped taking to campus 2 years ago. I'd noticed he still powered it up now and then, maybe as a backup. Or maybe because it held another identity. The tablet didn't even have a lock screen. I swiped to unlock. Just a few icons on the home screen. One stood out. A reading app. Innocuous looking. I tapped in. The interface was empty. Too empty. I opened the account tab on the sidebar. And there it was. A different login, richie.tied@. One tap and my thumb hovered midair. At the top of the message list was a contact labeled mbaby with a bubblegum pink avatar, glitter stickers, and a string of red kiss marks. I opened the chat. The screen glowed bright. Every word hit me like a blade. Mbaby. "Daddy, I wore your favorite white dress today, winking face." "Richard, the way you walk makes it impossible to focus." Mbaby. "Do I look innocent today?" Richard. "Too good, I'm starving for you." Mbaby. "You think your wife will find out?" Richard. "Her? That old hag hit menopause 10 years ago. He probably doesn't even remember what a tampon looks like." Mbaby. "You're so bad, face blowing a kiss." Richard. "What feels better, the tampon or daddy?" That last line rang like shattered glass in my skull. My fingers trembled. So I kept scrolling. Richard. "Sharing a bed with her makes me gag." Richard. "She smells like an antique doll left in a damp basement." Richard. "You're different. Even your toes smell sweet." I shut the screen. Slid the tablet back where it was. Left the room. I didn't cry. Didn't throw anything. Didn't scream. I stood in the hallway outside the bathroom, listening to the dishwasher hum downstairs, the sound of textbook pages turning in the kitchen. And suddenly it all clicked. This man, after I gave up a promotion for him, carried his child, built him a home, stood by him for 30 years, had decided that my body was now a joke. That my aging was a punchline to share with someone young enough to be our son's classmate. His innocent girl had sat on my couch, eaten from my plates, and even used the bathroom attached to the master suite I decorated myself. At 3 a.m. I turned on my laptop, compiled screenshots of the entire conversation, and sent them to an encrypted email address. I wasn't ready to strike just yet. They were too comfortable, too sure that I still believed in the man who refills my wine and worries about my blood pressure. But they'd learn soon enough. 30 years of my life isn't a mat to be trampled on. It was a world I built, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. And if they want to walk through it like it's theirs, I'll burn the whole damn thing to the ground. I didn't lose my mind and strike back right away. A man who could play the role of the perfect husband for 30 years wouldn't fall from grace over a few screenshots. Richard was too clever. Emily too slippery. If I acted on impulse, I'd only tip them off. What I needed was more than just proof that would ruin him publicly. I needed evidence so solid it would leave him no room to deny, no wiggle space, no loophole. Monday morning, Richard left for the university like usual. I didn't ask if he wanted lunch, didn't remind him about his keys. Just walked him to the door like any ordinary retired wife. 10 minutes after he left, I drove to the townhouse. The cameras were functioning perfectly, but that wasn't enough. I needed them to lower their guard. More than anything, I needed to catch them in the act. I sat in Jacob's future kitchen, staring out the window at the golden autumn sun. Birds fluttered onto the white oak tree, pecking at acorns. The whole scene was so peaceful it felt like mockery. My phone buzzed. A message from the installation tech. Remote diagnostics showed everything was working fine. I opened the app and checked the camera angles. One dead spot at the foot of the bed. I made a mental note to adjust that later. Richard hadn't brought Emily here yet. He knew I might still be popping in and out, so he was playing it safe. That was fine. I was about to give him the perfect opportunity. A week later I made my move. I'm thinking of taking a short trip next week, I said casually over tea. Diane signed up for one of those senior bus tours. Forest cabins, hot springs. Up in the mountains. Thought I'd tag along. He blinked. Aren't we supposed to celebrate our anniversary next week? We'll celebrate when I get back, I said lightly. You've got work anyway. No need to force a schedule. He lowered his newspaper. Hesitated. Then said, well, maybe you should go. You've earned a break. I saw it then, just a flicker of relief on his face. Hook, line, and sinker. The morning I left, I went all out. Oversized travel bag, wide-brimmed straw hat, even a dramatic pause at the door. Don't forget to trim my roses, I reminded him. They'll get wild after a week. He smiled. I won't. Go enjoy yourself. But I didn't drive north. Instead, I looped through a few side streets and checked into a West Side hotel suite. Top floor, private balcony, full sun. I sank into the plush sofa, opened the surveillance app and waited. 2 full days passed before he brought her in. They entered like teenagers sneaking into a parent's house. Richard stepped in first, Emily trailing behind, laughing as she gave his shoulder a playful tap. You sure your wife's gone? Of course, he said, locking the door behind them. She's in Northern California. Cell signal's garbage up there. Emily strolled into the living room, spun around, stretched her arms. So much better than a hotel. Pie house. Richard laughed. It'll be our house soon. Yours and mine. I watched them on the screen. Calm, controlled. My heart didn't race. If anything, I felt colder. Harper. This used to be you and your wife's home, right? Emily picked up a framed photo from the mantel. You really brought me here? Don't make it sound so scandalous, Richard said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. She doesn't even know why I agreed to buy this place. I made sure she stayed in the dark. She never took care of you all these years? Emily teased. She was always too busy. Obsessing over our son, micromanaging everything. She hasn't been attractive in years. His voice was so casual, like he was complaining about a couch that lost its shape. I hit the record button. Every word, every whisper was saved. Emily wandered into the kitchen and opened the fridge. You still have that vanilla yogurt I brought last time? Of course, Richard said, patting her waist. I couldn't bring myself to eat it. Everything you pick is special. Their exchange wasn't flirty anymore. It was practiced, familiar. Like two people who'd rehearsed their betrayal. The camera showed them drifting closer, their bodies entwining on the couch. I clicked the screen off. I didn't need to see any more. Later that night, I opened my laptop and reviewed the footage. Crisp audio. Perfect angles. Timestamps all in place. I already had screenshots of their messages. Now I had their voices, their movements, their faces. A professor and his former student, crossing every professional and moral boundary. But I knew that wasn't enough. Richard wouldn't go down without a fight. He'd twist the story, say I was controlling, that I entrapped him, that I doctored the footage. He'd play the victim. So I needed something bigger. Something that would make him light the match himself. 2 days later I texted him. The air here is amazing. There's a quiet little inn down the hill. You have to come visit someday. He replied within minutes, adding a smiley face. We'll go together when you're back. But 2 hours after I hit send, Emily requested research leave from the university. And Richard marked 3 days of off-site research in the department calendar. Got it. I sat on the hotel balcony, watching the cars blur past on the distant freeway, sipping a glass of red wine. They had no idea the bait had already been swallowed. I opened my laptop and renamed the video file. Just one word in the title. Anniversary plan. The morning they left, I made sure to get home before Richard did. I stood at the doorway, noting the damp marks on the driveway where he'd washed his car the night before. The rose bush on the windowsill was freshly trimmed, almost overly manicured. He really was thorough, like a husband with nothing to hide. The kitchen counters were spotless. The coffee machine had just been used. His mug sat in the sink unrinsed. I didn't clean it. I didn't wait for him. Instead, I left a single note on the fridge. I've booked a room at a mountain inn for a week. No need to worry. Seems like the perfect place for you to enjoy the view. That evening, like clockwork, Richard drove off in his gray Honda SUV. Emily sat in the passenger seat, sunglasses on, smiling as if life had never been lighter. She wore a mint green hoodie that carefully curated, no makeup kind of pretty. They headed toward Mount Rainier. Traffic was smooth, and I opened step 2 of the plan. The next morning, from our home in Redmond, I logged into a private email account and posted an anonymous message. Missing persons alert. My husband, Dr. Richard Benton, left on the evening of March 25th with a student, Emily Carson, to conduct research in the Mount Rainier National Park region. Due to sudden weather changes and difficult terrain, both individuals have been unreachable for over 24 hours. Please, if you are a hiker, part of a trekking group, or experienced in search and rescue, we are offering a $5,000 reward for any information. I attached photos of both of them, their car make and model, their intended route, and the last known GPS location from their phones. Within minutes, the post spread across Facebook and Nextdoor, then trickled into Reddit and Twitter. Hikers chimed in with trail maps. Some questioned whether they had the proper permits. Others offered to organize local search parties. Then a few media accounts picked it up. A well-known West Coast University professor and a young student go missing near Mount Rainier. $5,000 reward offered. Hashtag Mount Rainier missing, hashtag academic scandal, hashtag search alert. The comment sections exploded. A professor and his student alone in the mountains? Sounds shady. Was this research even approved? Emily's his student? Or something else? It didn't take long before the calls started pouring in. I answered in a deliberately exhausted voice. We haven't heard from them in over 30 hours, I whispered. I've filed a missing persons report, but the signal out there is awful. The whole family's barely holding it together. The dispatcher sounded firm. We're expanding the search radius. Please gather any relevant documents and medical records for our team. I hung up and checked the surveillance app. The house was empty. The living room still. The bedroom untouched. Only the wind chime in Richard's office moved slightly in the breeze. By evening, the police texted an update. Search teams had entered the mountain. Based on online leads, they would broaden the area. I gave the message a quiet thumbs up. Then I opened my laptop. Using a separate anonymous email, I sent a short video clip to a local news station. Subject line: possible footage involving missing professor and student. For investigation purposes only. I knew they wouldn't air it right away. But they'd archive it, cross-check it, maybe even forward it to law enforcement. All I needed was to plant the seed. By day 3, the story hit morning radio. A sociology professor from Redmond University and a graduate student are missing in the Mount Rainier area. Police have launched a formal search. I stood in my kitchen, coffee in hand, listening as the anchor solemnly read Richard's name. As though he'd already been lost to the wilderness. That's when my phone buzzed with a message from Jacob. Mom, are you okay? Is it true? Did Dad really go up there with her? I stared at the screen for a moment, then called him. He did, I said quietly. He and Emily went up there together. Their phones have been off for more than a day. The police are searching, but no news yet. There was silence. Then Jacob asked, hesitant, Mom, what is he to her? What's their relationship? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I asked him, what do you think they are? More silence. Then a deep, weary sigh. I really wanted to believe he wasn't who you think he is. I used to want that too, I replied. That afternoon they were found. Not deep in the wilderness. not stranded in a gorge. They were discovered just behind a small lodge on an old hiking trail, less than 200 yards from the main road. The weather was clear. The terrain manageable. No one gets lost that close, unless they're trying to be found just late enough. Richard had broken his leg, allegedly from slipping while trying to escape the crowds. Emily was found crying in the brush nearby, makeup streaked, hoodie askew. The lodge owner said they were in their room all night. Next morning, once folks showed up asking questions, he freaked out, grabbed the girl and bolted up the hill. Then bam, down he went. As officers guided them back down the mountain, someone snapped a photo. Richard's face was pale, sweat soaking through his dress shirt. His pants were torn at the ankle, wrapped in a makeshift bandage. Emily looked disheveled in an off-shoulder tee, her mascara smeared in charcoal streaks. The photo made it online before sunset. Caption: were they conducting research, or hiding an affair? Jacob came with me to the hospital. The moment we walked into the room, we saw Richard, strapped to the bed for drip running, leaning toward Emily, whispering something low. We didn't speak, just stood there. Jacob watched for a few seconds, then turned to me and said quietly, "You were right. We can't pretend we don't see it anymore." I nodded. This mountain incident wasn't the grand finale. For me, it was just the spotlight's warm-up. The real storm had only just begun. If that so-called disappearance incident was a lightning strike, then Richard's redemption tour was the fireworks after the storm, bright, loud, and completely performative. He stayed in the hospital for just 2 days before he was sitting up, ready to receive visitors like a local hero. I thought foolishly that he might try to keep a low profile, considering the internet had already stopped treating it as some harmless hiking accident. People were digging into the ethics of faculty-student relationships. Someone pulled up photos of him and Emily at school events. One comment under a local news article read, "You really believe this was field research? I believe Mount Rainier tastes like peaches too." But Richard never cared what people said. Only how he looked saying it. On the 5th day, the university sent a delegation. I was sitting on the pull-out couch in the corner of the hospital room with Jacob when the door opened and in walked 4 or 5 people. At the front was Zachary Hunt, Associate Dean, Richard's longtime colleague, drinking buddy, co-author of a couple of those co-branded research anthologies. "Richard." Zach's voice boomed like he was greeting an old war veteran. "So glad you're okay." Behind him trailed 2 junior faculty and a student rep, who was awkwardly carrying a large banner, not a traditional embroidered one, but a stretched canvas with red and white lettering that read, "Dedicated Scholar, Tireless Mentor." The moment I saw it, I almost laughed out loud. I clenched the tissue in my hand to keep it from slipping out. They hung the banner right there on the wall, like it was a damn awards ceremony. "We know there've been some irresponsible rumors online," Zach said, turning to me with a look of earnest concern. "Claire, we're truly sorry you and Jacob have to go through this. But please know the faculty stands firmly behind Richard. This fieldwork was part of an approved departmental initiative. Originally, more research assistants were scheduled to go, but Emily just happened to be the one available." I didn't call him out. Even though I had Emily's leave request backed up and printed, handwritten, marked independent research. Even though Richard's itinerary was never logged through official channels. Even though the project ID they kept referencing didn't exist anywhere on the school's academic registry. I just smiled and nodded like a good wife. "Thank you," I said softly. "It means a lot that you'd clear the air." Zach visibly relaxed. "We're preparing a press release to help correct the narrative. We want the public to know Redmond University's professors don't just hide in their offices. They go where the work takes them." Then he looked directly at me. "You support this, right?" I kept smiling. "Of course. I support my husband's work, always." He didn't notice how hard I hit the word husband. The media followed suit. 2 days later, the Seattle Times ran a small column on the bottom right of the front page. "Professor and student go missing during field research. Found safe after minor injury. Family says he always puts academic duty before personal comfort." Jacob had refused to give any interview. My part was trimmed down to 2 short lines. "He works hard. He's a dedicated researcher." No one bothered to ask Emily. She never said a word but appeared in every news photo, standing by Richard's bed, notebook in hand, looking like she was still documenting important data. But what finally cemented my decision wasn't the media circus. It was that night. Richard, sitting up in bed, adjusting the collar of his hospital gown, looked at me and said casually, "You handled this well. You didn't screw up the press part." I put down the paring knife I'd been using on fruit and stared at him. "Screw up?" I said. "Yeah." He flipped through channels like we were discussing dinner plans. "You didn't go to the press, didn't accuse me and Emily. It shows you still understand the bigger picture. You know I'm not just some professor anymore," he added, glancing at me with a crooked smirk. "The school's pushing forward my nomination for dean. The vote's next month." Then, in a tone that was all too familiar, half sweet talk, half threat, he said, "Don't let your feelings ruin the future of this family, all right?" I smiled, because I finally understood why he'd brought up the deanship. He needed me to behave, to stay quiet, at least until that vote went through. He still thought I knew nothing. Still believed I was the same woman who used to whisper, "Family matters more than anything." But I wasn't that woman anymore. That night, after he fell asleep, I took the hard-shell USB drive from my nightstand and plugged it into my laptop. It held a compilation of the key footage. I'd already edited the clips, chosen the most damning 3. Richard and Emily making out on our living room sofa, our wedding photo hanging just over their heads. Richard sneering, telling her, "She smells like old people. You're new. I like new." And him laughing, "She probably doesn't even know what a tampon looks like." I added subtitles, timestamps, and a 5-second black screen at the start. On that black screen in plain white text I wrote, "This is your tireless mentor." I didn't upload it. Not yet. I just backed it up. Again and again. Stored it in multiple encrypted drives. Sent copies to several anonymous email accounts. The next morning, I left a comment under the school's official announcement naming Richard Benton as a nominee for dean. Congratulations to Professor Richard Benton. 30 years of academic excellence, and enough recorded material for a very compelling screening. That evening, before the video had gone viral, before a single link leaked, Richard came into the bedroom and stood there in silence. "What are you watching?" he asked. I closed the laptop. Looked up with a smile. "Your video." He didn't say anything. Just frowned slightly. Paused. Like he wasn't sure if I was joking. Or if I knew. Then he turned and walked into the bathroom. The door shut harder than it needed to. I never touched him. Not with a single finger. Because if I had, he'd have become the victim, and I the unhinged wife. All I did was let him climb. I handed him back his favorite stage and quietly pulled the curtain wide open. Ever since coming home from the hospital, Richard had been visibly on edge. With the dean's vote approaching, he was scrambling, writing speeches, submitting reform proposals, replying to an endless flood of media and board emails. "My inbox is a disaster," he grumbled one morning, perched on a bar stool at the kitchen island. "I get over 100 messages a day. I swear my brain's about to explode." I placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of him. "You're not exactly a spring chicken anymore," I said gently. "Maybe hire an assistant to help sort things out?" He shook his head. "Can't delegate this. Some of it needs my voice. That's what makes it feel sincere." That was Richard in a nutshell. He believed control could solve anything. A few days later, Emily walked through our front door again. This time not sneakily, but with full confidence, carrying a bag of nutritional supplements. "Daddy, you have to try these," she chirped, holding up a bottle with obnoxiously loud packaging. "All natural, no side effects, total vitality boost. You'll be unstoppable." I was sitting at the other end of the table, flipping through a magazine. I didn't even look at her. "Do those have FDA approval?" I asked casually. She paused. My friend recommended them." I nodded. "Well, good luck with them. You two test away." She pouted, then turned back to Richard, resuming her syrupy tone. "You've lost weight again, haven't you? You better not pass out during your big day." Richard laughed, tousling her hair. "Don't worry. I'm still young at heart." I didn't stop him from taking the capsules. I knew he wouldn't listen. I knew moderation was never his thing. He had to become dean. He had to restore his image. He had to prove that the mountain incident was just a bump in his legacy. His pride was like a wind-up clock, set to complete its perfect, uninterrupted loop. and all I had to do was let it tick. I wasn't idle either. I told Jacob quietly, I took your dad's laptop to run a system check, just in case it crashes during the speech. He nodded. Good call. He's not sleeping. He's a mess. I can't talk sense into him. I patted his shoulder. Don't worry. He still needs your cooperation for now. But the real choice, Jacob, eventually it's yours to make. Jacob didn't answer. His expression tightened. He wasn't ready to hate his father outright. But hate doesn't need permission. It only needs time and enough truth to sink. A week before the inauguration, Richard was unraveling. He kept popping Emily's supplements, sleeping barely 3 or 4 hours a night, revising slides, rehearsing his speech, and drafting an open letter to rebrand the incident as a model case of wilderness field research. I noticed small changes. He started gripping pens awkwardly, writing slower than usual. Sometimes he would freeze mid-sentence, confused, like he'd forgotten what he was even trying to say. Am I getting brain fog? He asked one night from the bathroom. I looked at his exhausted, stubborn face and replied softly, maybe you're just overworked. You used to say I reminded you of my dad, he chuckled. He worked until his last day, sharp as a blade. I smiled and nodded. You're just like him. Stubborn to the end. The night before the ceremony, he finally turned to me. Will you be there tomorrow? I smiled faintly. Of course. After 30 years of marriage, you think I'd miss it? He exhaled, relieved. You don't know what it means, to have you standing beside me. It tells the world I'm still trusted. I didn't tell him the truth. That I wouldn't just be by his side. I'd make sure everyone saw him. The real him. I swapped out the candles in the living room, replacing them with a calming lavender blend I used to light during anxious times. It wouldn't cause harm. Wouldn't trigger anything. But it made the space feel peaceful. Harmless. I didn't touch Emily's pills. He took them willingly. He believed they made him virile again. Just like he believed young women still chased him for his brilliance. All I did was switch out the USB stick he used for his speech. Same model. Same casing. Different content. The next morning, I wore a long charcoal gray dress and for the first time in years my pearl necklace. Richard stared at me a little stunned. You look stunning today. I smiled. So do you. I hope you remember every clap you hear. We arrived at the auditorium together. The room was packed. Faculty, board members, donors, student representatives, media. Emily didn't sit with the guests. She wore a navy dress and stood behind the curtain at stage right. I knew they had planned it. After the ceremony, she would make her official appearance, as the loyal academic assistant who stood by her mentor in his darkest hour. Maybe she'd already imagined it, Mrs. Dean someday. But she forgot something. I was still here. And she would never, ever be me. The host walked up to the podium, cleared his throat. Please welcome this year's nominee for Dean of Redmond University, Dr. Richard Benton. Spotlight. Thunderous applause. Richard rolled onto the stage, laptop in lap, wearing the smile he'd practiced for weeks. He turned to me. Our eyes met. I gave him the smallest, most serene nod. He said, Thank you all. I'm Richard Benton. Today I want to take you on a journey through my 30 years in academia. But maybe in a way, a little deeper than you expected. And with that, the screen lit up. The applause died instantly. The ceremony ended in chaos, and that same night, Richard was rushed to the hospital. Not because he'd been exposed, but because of himself. The moment the video hit the screen, he tried to deny everything. Tried to shout over the gasps. Tried to convince everyone it was a deep fake, malicious editing, doctored footage. He even turned to the AV tech and barked. Who switched the USB? This is fake. This is a smear job. But no one came to his defense. Because every frame was unmistakably him. Crystal clear. Unedited. Unforgiving. His voice, his gestures, his smug little chuckles, broadcast like a magnified X-ray, stripping him bare in front of the world. And when he finally realized there was no taking it back, no narrative he could twist, no face he could save, he collapsed. Mid-sentence. Face pale, lips twitching. Then like an old tree finally giving out, he fell sideways off the stage. The audience erupted. Some screamed. Some filmed. A few rushed toward him, calling for help. I didn't move. This wasn't my moment to step in. This was the exact spot where he had chosen to fall. Later, the doctor said it was stress-induced neurogenic syncope, triggered by acute hypertension and minor cerebral hypoperfusion. Not fatal. But he'd need to remain in bed for at least 2 weeks. He was moved to a private room the next morning. Emily arrived shortly after. She wore a cashmere cardigan in warm brown tones, soft makeup, a carefully curated look of gentle concern, like the innocent assistant who just wanted to make sure her mentor was okay. I sat in the hallway corner watching her slip in and out of the room like she belonged there. Like she had always belonged there. A nurse passed by and offered kindly, "Ma'am, you can go in. Visiting hours don't apply to immediate family." I smiled politely. "Thank you," I said. "But I think he needs his student more than his wife right now." The nurse blinked, confused, then nodded and moved on. 2 days later, Emily asked to meet me. Not at the hospital. At our townhouse. "I figured you wouldn't want a scene in the hospital," she said like she was doing me a favor. I didn't decline. I wanted to see what she had the nerve to say. The weather was perfect that afternoon. I arrived an hour early and reinstalled a backup camera in the overhead storage slot above the master bedroom closet. Then I changed into a soft beige cardigan, brought a bag of pastries, and played the role of the calm middle-aged housewife. She was already seated at the dining table when I arrived. "Mrs. Benton," she said with a smile, pouring water into 2 glasses, "you're calmer than I expected." "And you're more eager than I expected," I replied, setting down the bag. "Barely a week's passed and you're already here to bargain?" She gave a little laugh, clasped her hands neatly, like she was about to make a PowerPoint pitch. "I'll just be direct," she said in her usual soft tone. "You probably already know that Richard and I weren't just professor and student. You don't think that's a bit late to say?" I asked, sitting down, my voice flat. "I'm not saying it to apologize," she clarified. "I'm here to talk compensation." My brow lifted slightly. "Your son Jacob, he's a promising young man," she said slowly, deliberately. "But if word got out that I also had a complicated history with him, his reputation might not survive the hit." I stared at her. She didn't flinch. "I don't want to escalate this. All I need is that townhouse. Or, if you'd rather, a severance payment, say $500,000. $500,000? I asked, smiling faintly. "What would you do with that kind of money?" "Life," she replied breezily. "Grad school abroad. Maybe a green card. Or just buy a nicer place somewhere new. I mean, it's not like you can't afford it." I kept my eyes on hers. She sat across from me, absolutely convinced that I was a tired, image-obsessed suburban wife. That I was afraid of scandal. Afraid my son might be dragged into it. Afraid my husband's infidelity would cost me both my pride and my money. She was young. She didn't understand that what made older women dangerous wasn't how loudly we screamed. It was how quietly we calculated. I nodded once. "When do you want the money?" She exhaled in relief. "I won't press the school. The dean vote's already tanked. We both lose if this gets messy. You send the money by the 5th of next month. Bank transfer is fine, or the deed to the townhouse, your call. After that, I leave the city. I disappear." I tilted my head. "And you're not worried I'll back out?" She smirked. "You don't seem like the type. You're classy. You won't risk looking like a liar. Besides," she added with a coy smile, "I don't think you want to see Jacob trending on Twitter." I nodded again. "Fair enough." She stood, picked up her bag, and paused at the doorway. "I know you're smart. You understand boundaries. As long as no one crosses the line, this all ends clean." She left. Once the door closed, I walked to the bookshelf, opened the companion app on my phone, and pulled up the feed. Crystal clear audio. Every word. From compensation to Jacob trending. No gaps. No ambiguity. I exported the file. Named it emilyandafura.wave. And uploaded it to an encrypted drive. Then I sent it to 3 people. My lawyer. And a trusted local journalist. Jacob called me within the hour. His voice was quieter than I expected. "Mom, she actually said that?" "Play the file," I said evenly. Pause. Then. I was blind. "No," I said gently. "You were young. What do I do now?" "Nothing. Not yet." I took a breath. "Let me take care of one last thing. Then you show up." Emily thought the scandal was just a PR mishap. She thought her threats would keep me quiet. She thought this was still a negotiation. But she made one mistake too many. Not because she blackmailed me. Not because she wanted a payout. Not even because she destroyed Richard's image. He came after my son. She underestimated what it means to push a mother beyond her line. I'm not the soft, forgiving woman she imagined. She touched my son's future. So now, I will make sure that she doesn't get one. 3 weeks had passed since Richard's fall from grace at the dean's ceremony. I hadn't visited him in the hospital. I hadn't gone to the police either. His story was already over. He would spend the rest of his days lying in that bed, poisoned by his own schemes, slowly learning what it meant to rot in the mess he created. Emily, though, she was still on stage, still trying to claim a crown. She'd been nominated for the Outstanding Women in the Community Award, recognized for her exceptional contributions to education and family life. The ceremony would be held at City Hall, attended by the mayor, local leaders, and a full row of press cameras. I didn't receive an invitation, but I knew I had to be there, because what she owed me couldn't be repaid with an apology. Emily hadn't let it go either. She never got the townhouse. Never got the $500,000. When she realized I hadn't wired the money by the agreed date, the tone of her messages shifted. At first they were sweet reminders. Then they turned to veiled threats. Don't make me do something ugly. I don't want to bring up your son's history, but if you push me. I never responded, because my answer had already been set in motion. A week before the award ceremony, I reached out to one of Emily's former teaching assistants. Years ago, she'd nearly lost her scholarship after refusing to falsify data, thanks to Emily's manipulation. I told her she didn't need to testify. I just needed the evidence. A few days later, a package arrived. Inside was a USB drive. Contained 3 videos. The first, Emily laughing in the lab saying, "These students are so naive. They think it's their research, but I rigged the data weeks ago. The numbers are just what I want the board to see." The second, her screaming at Richard's elderly mother. "You better get this straight. If your son dies, I'm in charge. The house, the car, they're mine. One word from me and you'll be on the street." The third, a surveillance clip of her in a faculty printer room, quietly forging my signature on a property transfer form. The document lay open beside her, my name in bold print. No edits. No cuts. All clear. I edited the footage into a tight 3-minute video. I added the forged bank transfer form and the document trail from my financial records. Printed copies. Uploaded digital backups. On the day of the ceremony, I wore an unremarkable tan coat and took a seat in the very back row. Emily stood on stage in a deep burgundy dress, hair perfectly styled, smiling as she posed for photos with the mayor. Her parents were there too, smiling, beaming, her mother cradling a small gift bag. She didn't know I had invited them personally. A short, formal email with just enough detail to pique curiosity. As the MC queued up her life achievements montage on the giant screen behind her, I quietly opened the remote app on my phone. The footage glitched for a second, then cut. No welcome speech. No polished video. Just her, laughing in the lab. These students are so naive. A low murmur swept through the room. Then the second clip. Her voice rising, full of rage. One word from me and you'll be on the street. Finally, the footage of her forging my name. Silence fell like a curtain. Only the low hum of the projector remained. Emily tried to keep smiling. This must be a mistake. Maybe a technical mix-up? But the mayor was already whispering to his aide, then stood and left the stage. The host awkwardly approached the mic. "We apologize for the interruption. Due to unexpected content, the award will be temporarily suspended pending further review." Emily froze. Her smile faltered. Her lips went pale. Her mother leaned in, voice tight. "You said all this was handled." And then, right on cue, my attorney stepped onto the stage. He carried a thick folder and spoke calmly into the mic. "As of this morning, we have officially filed a civil lawsuit in King County Superior Court against Ms. Emily Carson for fraud, academic misconduct, and identity theft. Documentation has been submitted to both legal authorities and the university board." The press stood up. Cameras flashed. Dozens of lenses pointed straight at her. Emily snapped. She lunged off the stage, heels clacking across the hardwood, eyes wild. She ran straight toward me, screaming, "You psycho! You ruined my life. I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked her in the eye and said, no. I just revealed the part of you you've been pretending didn't exist. Security pulled her back. Her eyes were bloodshot. Her breath ragged. I turned and walked out of the hall. There was no applause. No cheers. Just a quiet I hadn't felt in years. A quiet like standing in the center of an empty room. And finally letting go of something that had weighed on you for far too long. The next morning I woke up at 7 just like always. The house was quiet. No footsteps pacing overhead in slippers. No voice calling out, Claire, where's my medication? I opened the window and let the sunlight pour in. Then I sat down and backed up yesterday's recordings and documents to the hard drive. A habit, though I knew I might never need them again. But I kept them anyway. They were my medals from this war. The lawsuit lasted 4 full months. Emily hired a lawyer and made a public statement, claiming I'd maliciously edited the footage, that I had previously consented to the gift, and that I had a history of psychological instability. Her defense, though, was like a paper boat tossed into a storm. It sank on contact. Every video had timestamps and unedited source files. My financial records were backed by official bank reports. The forged property document. Handwriting experts confirmed the signature wasn't mine. It was enough to establish civil fraud. And then came the testimony. The former TA she bullied took the stand. So did the financial officer who flagged the unauthorized borrowed transfers from Richard's account before his collapse. Richard never appeared in court. He didn't defend Emily. His lawyer submitted a single statement on his behalf. Mr. Benton had no prior knowledge, did not participate, and does not wish to intervene. Exactly like his approach to our entire marriage. Detached. Passive. Selectively blind. In the end, the court ruled in my favor. I retained primary inheritance rights to the property, retirement accounts, and joint savings. Emily was ordered to repay the stolen funds in full and cover legal costs. The house, the one we once built as a family home, was legally returned to me. Richard was stripped of all academic titles. The university released a statement announcing a formal internal investigation into serious breaches of professional and ethical conduct. He disappeared from public view, and from mine. He now lives with his sister, supported by disability insurance. I've heard recovery hasn't been kind to him. His speech is slurred and he struggles to form full sentences. The sister who once looked at me with so much disdain now changes his diapers. She was overheard saying at a family gathering, Emily never loved him. She just wanted the money. But really they were the same kind of person. One built her pride on deception. The other masked his neediness with control. This wasn't karma. It was a debt. Paid in full. Jacob came to see me. 3 days after the video went public, he walked through the door, sat at the kitchen table, and said nothing for a long time. He wore a baseball cap low over his eyes. His fingers tapped nervously against the wood. I poured him a glass of water and waited. Finally he said, Mom, I'm sorry. I looked at him. Are you afraid people will look down on you? I asked softly. His eyes dropped to the floor. I continued. You were ashamed of me being a housewife. Ashamed your father was slipping. Ashamed Emily might call you a daddy's boy. You let the weight of everyone's judgment shape your back. And in all that time, you couldn't bring yourself to look at the woman who raised you for 30 years. His eyes filled with tears. He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it like he couldn't find a place to start. I didn't press him. A few days later my lawyer called. The divorce was finalized. I'd formally split the marital assets. And updated my will. Richard now had no access to the house, insurance, or joint accounts. I added a clause stating that if he, or anyone acting on his behalf, ever tried to claim reimbursement for medical expenses, I reserved the right to take legal action. The lawyer laughed. Claire, this document's brutal. You write tougher than we do. I smiled. It's not brutal. It's clear. I sold our 3-story suburban home. Moved into a small apartment downtown with an elevator and a view of the river. Across the water sat the city's arts district. On weekends, street performers filled the sidewalks. One time I saw a group of elderly women dancing tap in full sequins. I clapped along with the crowd. I signed up for a pottery class. My mugs came out lopsided and uneven, but when I filled them with hot water, I felt a kind of pride I hadn't known in years. I joined a local group called Second Circle, a community of women over 50. Divorced, widowed, rebuilding. We shared stories. They taught me one thing. We're not what's left. We're what finally got a chance to live for ourselves. Sometimes I wonder if the 30 years were worth it. If I could go back to that night I first met Richard, would I walk away? But then I remind myself. I don't regret it. Those years. I gave them freely. What I took back. I earned. I didn't just reclaim money. I reclaimed dignity. A voice. The right to live as me. One morning, sunlight streamed through my sheer curtains. I was watering my balcony plants when a young girl passed below. She looked up and waved, smiling. Earbuds in, humming a pop song I didn't recognize. But that lightness she carried. That unbothered, self-assured rhythm. It used to be unimaginable to me. Now I had finally earned the right to feel it. This is where the story ends. No lingering resentment. No waiting for apologies. Just me, finally, becoming. And that was enough.